Got dreams of being a professional podcaster, but have no idea what you're doing?
This is impossible.
That's about to change.
A new kind of school.
Welcome to the Pod School Podcast.
Welcome to the show, and apologies for my mildly sex line operator voice. I am in the final throes of a sickness that brought me down like a sack of potatoes. On the show today, I'm going to be talking about the part of the process of podcasting that happens after you have uploaded your MP3 and it is out in the world into people's ear holes. And unfortunately, I'm going to break the news that your job does not stop there. Sometimes it is easy once you've gotten through the process of actually editing and getting it up online and putting together the website and doing all the social media posting to breathe a big sigh of relief and get on to the next one. But there are some things that can happen that mean it is important to listen to that show once it has gone live. Just in the last few weeks, I've had a few of these things happen to me, and that was because for a moment I took my eye off the ball and stopped listening to the episodes once they went live because I just ran out of time. And unfortunately, it was a couple of weeks later that I realized that the episodes I had up in my feed were not at all the quality that I had uploaded them at. And then I realized that for the last 2 weeks, people have been listening to an episode that didn't sound the way I intended it to sound when I uploaded it. And that really affects your brand and your podcast and the way that people think about it. So it's really important that every episode in your podcast feed is at the standard that you want people to hear it at. And the only way that you're going to know if that happens is if you actually listen to the show once it's gone live. So some of the things that can happen is that the upload can be a bit glitchy. What I mean by this is that the episode can jump around through time codes. I'm not 100% sure because I am no tech geek when it comes to understanding the upload side of things. I can put it all together and press all the appropriate buttons, but I don't know what magical codey stuff is happening behind the scenes. But I have heard it on other podcasts as well as my own. So when you listen through to the episode, it actually jumps back a bit and you'll rehear something else, or it jumps forward. So it sounds like the episode hasn't been edited properly. So when you listen through to it, obviously as an audience member who hasn't heard the original uploaded version, you're going to think to yourself, geez, these edits are a bit amateur. But in reality, something's gone wrong when you've uploaded the file. So for those episodes, it's happened to me twice in a row now. I've just re-uploaded the MP3 and somehow through the magic of podcast hosting, that has fixed the issue. So I'm not sure why that happens behind the scenes, but sometimes it can happen. So while it can be really frustrating if you've already listened to the show 19 times through the editing process, to listen to it just one more time from start to finish, it is really important if you want to make sure that every single episode of your podcast is reflective of the kind of quality that you want people to hear from your show. The other thing that I've had happen in the past, especially with my previous podcast, Paul and Rach, on that show, we used to have little segment dividers or things called stings. And basically, they were little audio pieces that I would slip in between the segments that we did on our shows. And sometimes, even though in the edit that I put together, once I'd listened through to that, all of those pieces were actually slotted in the appropriate area. For some reason, again, I am not going to profess to know why, those little pieces of audio sometimes would not be there in the final upload. So essentially why that was a problem for our show at the time was because we were a comedy show and we would do little sections, and obviously at the end of each section the point is to get out on a laugh, and then if you play a piece of produced audio after that, then it wraps up that break really nicely. But if you just get laugh and then awkward silence, it doesn't quite have the same effect. So that's something that I noticed was missing in my other podcast. And the other thing that sometimes happens was that the intro would be missing. So when you actually pressed play in iTunes, it would be silence for the length of the intro and then our hello. So sometimes that would be because of whatever magical thing happens in the background that I don't understand. Other times it would be because there is a button to mute individual tracks, and somehow in the process of editing I'd accidentally knocked that on and I wasn't aware of it. When I exported the file, I thought everything was fine because I'd listened through to it, and so it's really important to listen to that once it goes live to make sure that hasn't happened. One other thing that it is possible to do, and I know this because I've done it myself, is to upload the wrong episode. In the process of shuffling around a million different files, I was replacing an audio file that I needed to update, and I uploaded that and again popped it in because I had just listened to it and thought everything was fine, and then realized that it was a completely different guest, and in fact it was a guest that was not supposed to be released for another 3 weeks that I had uploaded in that episode spot instead. So that's a rookie error on my part, but the only way that I worked that out was actually by listening to the episode back once it had gone online and been uploaded and thinking to myself, holy crap, thank goodness that wasn't there for sort of 3 weeks before I noticed it, because that would have made me look like a real chump. I am telling you these things because it is important to realize that even when you think you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and you've listened to things a million times over, it is still possible to make mistakes, and it is also possible to make zero mistakes, but for something inside your computer and inside your podcast host to go wrong. That means the podcast doesn't sound the way that you intend it to. And it is so important from a quality control perspective that you make sure every episode in that podcast feed sounds exactly the way that you want it to, because your audience has no idea what the show sounded like. All they hear is the glitchy episode that is just annoying to listen to and makes them think that you have no idea how to edit a podcast. So even though it can take a little time, you can obviously just pop your podcast on in your ears while you're doing other stuff like the shopping or driving. But it's really important once you've pressed publish on that episode, not to let that be the last involvement you have with it. Casting your ear just one final time over the product that gets into your listeners' ears will make sure that the show they get in their ears is what you intended them to get. As always, I will pop show notes for this episode up at podschoolpodcast.com. There you can also find links to my online podcasting guide that takes you through all the tools and tech you need if you are starting up your podcast and you don't know how the heck to set up a home studio. That will help you work out exactly what you need. And you can also find out more about my online podcasting course, Pod School. That's a step-by-step course that takes you through every part of the podcasting process. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next week. And until then, happy podcasting.
That's all for today.